There's something unsettling about a dog growling at nothing. You've seen it, haven't you? That split second when your normally calm and carefree dog suddenly freezes, their body tensing as they let out a deep, throaty growl, directed at what looks like thin air. It's moments like these that make even the most skeptical dog owners pause. Could it be that our dogs sense something we can't? Plenty of owners swear by it, claiming their dogs can pick up on things beyond our perception, unseen presences lurking just out of sight. I've always thought of Louis as a typical dog, playful, loyal, and a little too curious for his own good. But lately, something about him had changed. He wasn't the carefree beagle I'd adopted just 6 months ago. Instead, he'd become jittery, waking up in the middle of the night with his fur bristling, growling at something I couldn't see. At first, I chalked it up to a mouse or maybe a stray cat that had somehow made its way into the kitchen. You know how dogs are. But then it kept happening, every night. And it wasn't just barking, it was the growling, low and steady, always directed at the same spot, the kitchen cupboard. The first night it happened, I didn't think much of it. I groggily stumbled out of bed, thinking maybe Louis had to go outside. But when I found him standing in the kitchen, stiff as a board, staring at the cupboard like it was about to spring to life, I felt a shiver run down my spine. His growls were deep, guttural, not the kind you hear when a dog's just playing around. I stood there in the doorway, watching him for what felt like forever. I couldn't figure out what he was looking at, but whatever it was, it had Louis freaked out. I tried to laugh it off, telling myself that maybe there was a rat or something hiding in there. But that didn't explain the unease gnawing at me, the way my skin prickled when I stepped into the kitchen. Louis wouldn't move. His eyes were fixed on the cupboard like he was expecting something to burst out of it at any moment. I gave him a pat on the head, trying to reassure him, and maybe myself too, and dragged him back to bed. But sleep didn't come easily that night. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing with all sorts of irrational thoughts. The next few nights were the same. Louis would wake up around 2 a.m., barking and growling at the kitchen cupboard. It was always the same cupboard. It didn't matter if I closed it, opened it, or emptied it. Louis acted like something was there. Something I couldn't see. His growls got more insistent, and soon he started refusing to even go into the kitchen during the day. It was like the room had become off limits to him. He would stand at the threshold, whining, his eyes darting toward that same cupboard as if something or someone was watching from inside. I knew it couldn't be an animal. I'd checked the cupboard a dozen times, even going so far as to pull it apart, but there was nothing. No droppings, no signs of life, just the usual pots and pans. But Louis knew something was wrong. I could feel it too, in the air. The kitchen felt colder, like someone had left a window open even though I knew it was sealed tight. The temperature was off, not just in the kitchen, but the entire house, like an icy draft had crept in from nowhere. One night, after weeks of sleepless nights and strange occurrences, I decided to record what was happening. I figured if I could capture it on camera, maybe I'd be able to convince myself it was nothing more than Louis being a quirky, over-imaginative dog. So I set up my phone on the kitchen counter right in front of the cupboard that Louis had been fixated on. As soon as I hit record, Louis started growling again, his eyes locked on the cupboard door. I whispered to him, "What is it, boy? What are you seeing that I can't?" He didn't take his eyes off that cupboard. It was as if he were waiting for something to happen, and then it did. At first, it was subtle, a small creak, barely audible, coming from the cupboard. I froze. I hadn't moved, and Louis certainly hadn't, but the sound was unmistakable. My heart started pounding in my chest. I tried to rationalize it. Old houses make noises, wood expands and contracts, blah, blah, blah. But none of that mattered when I saw it. The cupboard door, it moved. Not a lot, but just enough. Just enough to send Louis into a barking frenzy. I grabbed the phone, my hands shaking, trying to focus on the cupboard. The door was still again, but my mind was racing. I could feel my palms sweating, my pulse hammering in my ears. "Louis, come on," I whispered, trying to get him to back away. But he wouldn't budge. He was standing his ground, ready to face whatever invisible terror had taken up residence in our kitchen. The night didn't end there. A few hours later, after I'd finally managed to get Louis to calm down, something else happened. I had just put Louis to bed and was dozing off when I heard a low, rhythmic growl. I bolted upright, my heart immediately racing again. The growling wasn't coming from the kitchen this time. It was closer, much closer. Louis had wandered back into the living room, his eyes fixed on something I hadn't noticed before. I followed his gaze, and that's when I saw it. A statue. It had been a gift from a friend, a small, eerie Egyptian statue that I'd never paid much attention to. But now, under Louis's watchful eyes, the thing looked wrong. The room felt different, colder, like all the warmth had been sucked out of it. The hair on the back of my neck stood on end. Louis's growls deepened, his teeth bared, his body tense. I couldn't explain it, but I felt it too, this oppressive energy radiating from the statue. I'd read once that objects could carry negative energy, but I'd always dismissed it as superstitious nonsense. Yet here I was, standing in my own living room, feeling like something was staring back at me from the statue's cold, lifeless face. Desperate for some kind of explanation, I started filming again, keeping my camera trained on the statue. Louis didn't take his eyes off it, his growls echoing through the silent room. And then, without warning, the temperature dropped. I felt it like a punch to the gut. One moment, the room was just cold, the next, it was freezing. I could see my breath hanging in the air, and Louis' growls grew louder, more frantic. Something wasn't right. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. Every noise, every creak of the house sent my mind spiraling into dark places. The next morning, I posted the video online, desperate for answers. Maybe someone had experienced something similar, or maybe I was losing my mind. The comments were filled with suggestions, people offering theories about haunted objects and lingering spirits. But one comment in particular stood out to me. Get rid of the statue. I didn't need to be told twice. I grabbed the statue, threw it in a box, and drove it straight to the nearest donation center. I didn't care what they did with it, as long as it was out of my house. Since then, Louis has stopped growling at the kitchen. The oppressive cold has lifted, and the house feels normal again. But every now and then, I catch him staring at the spot where the statue used to be, his eyes wide and alert, as if he's still on guard. Whatever was attached to that statue, it's gone now. But I'll never forget the way it made me feel. How it made us feel. I can't say for sure what happened in my house, whether it was a spirit, a curse, or just my imagination running wild. But I do know one thing. Sometimes, it's better not to question the things we can't explain, especially when our dogs see them before we do.